Happy Mother's Day to all who celebrate. I know not all of us are mothers, but I imagine most of us have had a mother. And our feelings around the mothers that we are or we aren't, the mothers we've had, the mothers we wish we'd had or wish we hadn't, or the mothers we wish we still had. All those feelings are present with us today. And even though I'm a person who has mostly happy feelings around my own mother and my own motherhood, I do want to just start by holding some space for all of the feelings and emotions that we bring in here today. I was talking to a friend who was a pastor for a very long time and told him that I was going to be preaching today, and he said, "Oh, Mother's Day sermons were always the worst." He hated it, and I thought, well, the only other sermon I preached here so far is about when Jesus died, so that's saying something if Mother's Day is less pleasant than that. My family, we moved to Georgia, back to Georgia for me, in March 2019, and we spent our first few months here visiting churches. And on Mother's Day 2019, we visited a church that was pastored by a woman and a mother, which was meaningful. Honestly, that day I don't remember the text that she preached from, but I do remember that she referenced the work of Rachel Held Evans, who is a Christian author and thought leader who had passed away only 8 days before that at the age of 37. Rachel Held Evans was and continues to be an incredibly formative force in my own faith. Through her writings, she made space for me to ask questions, just as I was willing to admit that I had them. She taught me to hold institutions and powerful people accountable. And she showed me ways that I could let my faith evolve and expand to hold doubts and mystery alongside beliefs and practices, while also demonstrating through her own faith that Jesus is still worth trusting. She was a mother to me in that way and continues to be. One of Rachel's earlier books was called A Year of Biblical Womanhood, where she studied scripture's instructions for women and followed them as literally as she could for a year. And that led her to do things that most self-respecting modern women would not do. The book's pretty entertaining, and it's a helpful reminder to be, number one, cautious of the word biblical when people use it as an adjective, and number two, that even self-proclaimed fundamentalists are pretty selective in how they apply the commands that we find in our Holy Scriptures. So, Proverbs 31 is possibly the girliest chapter in the Bible. Starting in verse 10, this poem, it describes the biblically ideal woman. This woman, she's virtuous. I mean, read it. She's really good to her husband. She is such a hard worker. She keeps an amazing home. She makes great meals. She designs her own fabulous clothing. She's prepared for anything, totally unflappable. She has toned arms, a side hustle. She's wise and kind, and she has a great but tasteful sense of humor. She wakes up early to get all of this done, and most importantly, her beautiful kids and fantastic husband recognize that all of this that she does has made her incredibly happy. Therefore, so are they. Thousands of years later, you can find books, conferences, ministries, Etsy shops, TikTok accounts, and hashtags dedicated towards nudging, forcing, compelling women towards this biblical ideal, the Proverbs 31 woman. And if you've ever picked up on my tendencies towards sarcasm and irreverence, you're probably not surprised that I like to joke that I'm a Proverbs 32 woman. My approach to life is a little bit more apocryphal. So, Rachel Held Evans, when she was researching for her book on biblical womanhood, she became friends with an Orthodox Jewish woman who helped her see Proverbs 31 through its intended cultural lens. This woman's name, I don't really speak Hebrew. Her name was Ahava. And she repeated a finding that Rachel had found in her research, that the first line of that Proverbs 31 poem, "A virtuous woman who can find," is best translated, "a woman of valor who can find." The Hebrew, which I've already confirmed that I do not speak, is Esa Chayil, woman of valor. To make this fact even more fun, Ahava explained to Rachel that she and her friends cheer one another on with this blessing, celebrating everything from promotions to pregnancies, acts of mercy and justice, battles with cancer. They cheer each other on with a Esa Chayil. I think of it like a yes, queen. So that's how we can cheer each other on around here. So this is a poem, right? It's an ideal. And actually, men sang this song to women. But the only time an actual person is called this term, Esa Chayil, in the Hebrew Bible is found in the book of Ruth. Ruth was a Moabite woman who married into an Israelite family who was living in Moab. Her father-in-law, the patriarch of this family, died, and eventually so did Ruth's husband and his brother. So that left Ruth, her sister-in-law, and her mother-in-law all widowed. Naomi, Ruth's mother-in-law, decided to return to her homeland in Israel and to her extended family who was living in Bethlehem. And so she encouraged her widowed daughters to stay in Moab and do the same. Go back to your families. Let them take care of you. And Ruth's sister-in-law decided to stay in Moab, but Ruth decided to travel with Naomi to Bethlehem and care for her. So when they get to Bethlehem, Ruth got to work in the barley fields, and she found herself working in a field that belonged to one of Naomi's relatives. That man, Boaz, was impressed by Ruth's love for and commitment to Naomi, his family member. So Boaz provided Ruth with safe working conditions, and he made sure that Ruth and Naomi had enough to eat and drink. And because of his kindness, Ruth kind of took her shot and made it known to him in a very clear, yet very classy way that she was interested in being his wife. And when she did this, he spoke a blessing over her, and he let her know that he would make sure that she was cared for because everyone around knew that she was a woman of valor, an Esa Chayil. So just to recap, Ruth was a foreigner. She came from a different land, a different culture, and a different religion. And now she was widowed, which in that context also meant that she was broke. In addition to that, she had a broke mother-in-law to take care of. And she was working in the field alongside servants. But Boaz saw her, and he called her a woman of valor. So I feel like when Grant is up here preaching, he is like a rhetorician for us. He is our community rhetorician. And I would like to appoint myself our resident linguist. I don't speak Hebrew, but I do speak Spanish. And as a person with a background in linguistics, I spent some time thinking about the word valor. In English, valor is defined as great courage in the face of danger. And that is really cool. And it is definitely different than virtuous, which means morally excellent. And I can think of plenty of reasons why the men who have written down and translated the Bible over thousands of years would prefer that women be morally excellent rather than brave. But yeah, valor is courage. But then there is another word I want to tell y'all about, and that word is valor. And Fede, you're gonna have to let me white-splain something for a second. But I'm hoping that Fede can confirm that valor can certainly be used to talk about courage and bravery and guts, but it also has to do with value and worth. Boaz recognized and affirmed not just Ruth's courage, but he affirmed her value when, societally speaking, she had none. Ruth's valor and her valor, her value, was rooted in her personhood, her commitment to caring for others, caring for her mother-in-law, and yes, her courage in the face of great adversity. Ruth put herself in a situation that could have cost her her reputation and even her life in order to give herself and her beloved Naomi a chance to be rescued from the dire situation in which they found themselves. Mother's Day, I think, can really be terrible for people, and perhaps especially women, who feel undervalued if they are not mothers. And far too often, It's communicated directly or indirectly that you cannot be an ideal, complete Christian woman without being a wife and a mother. And of course, I think we all know that a person's perceived value can be affected every day of the year by their gender or their sexual identity, their marital status, their family structure, their race, their legal status, their economic status, their physical or intellectual ability, etc., etc. Far too often, we conflate privilege with worth. And I'm proud to be part of this faith community at Madras, where the baseline is that we are all welcomed and valued here. And I'd also argue that we do that because of how God's love is depicted in the Bible, not just through what we consistently see in the life and teachings of Jesus, but also even in Old Testament texts like this story of Ruth. If you keep reading the book of Ruth, you'll see that eventually, yes, Ruth became a wife and a mother. But Ruth was called a woman of valor long before that. When Ruth was a poor woman lying in Boaz's floor begging for his help, Boaz recognized her valor and her valor, and he affirmed those qualities in her. So today, I want to affirm that in all of us. Friends, we are people with value. Each of us has inherent value, rooted in the fact that we are children of God. Each of us a unique reflection of God's image. Ha'il, all of us. We have God-given value, and there is nothing that we can be or do to change that. If my kids can grow up believing that and knowing their worth and living accordingly, then I'll feel like I did the mom thing well enough. Or perhaps even more so, that we, all of us, did the church thing well enough. We are all people of great worth. And friends, we can be people of great courage. I think about the Ruths in my own life. When my grandmother was 2, her mother became very sick, and on her deathbed, my great-grandmother asked her husband to marry her best friend so that she could die knowing that her kids would be cared for. And that best friend, Ruth, helped heal a family struck by tragedy. She became the matriarch of our family, and there are many stories of the times when she held everyone together during times of uncertainty. She was consistently courageous. At times, courageous acts occur after someone finally does realize their own worth. I think of another Ruth who left her abusive marriage and toxic faith community. I think of yet another Ruth who has done the hard work of getting and staying sober. These are some of the bravest women I know. These are women of valor. We shared earlier some of the reasons why we need to be brave, and I don't know all the reasons that each of us need to be courageous. But bravery, courage, valor can take many forms. Maybe it's admitting we need help. Maybe it's creating and maintaining a boundary in a relationship. Or maybe it's taking the risk of extending an olive branch. Maybe it is confronting the misuse of power. Valor is not about a role or a position. Valor is letting our God-given worth compel us to brave acts of love and service. And by doing so, joining in God's work of mending and healing and restoring our world. So friends, may we know our own God-given valor, and may we affirm that valor in the lives of others. And may the knowledge of our God-given worth give us the courage to do what we can to make the world right and just for all God's children. Amen.